Misogynist judge sends innocent woman to prison, her revenge stuns everyone. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. At the center of it all sat Judge Malcolm Warner, a man notorious for his sharp tongue and his disdain for anyone who dared to challenge his authority, especially women. His rulings were legendary, not for their fairness but for their harshness. Critics whispered about his bias, his tendency to disregard evidence when it came from women, but no one dared to openly confront him. He was untouchable, or so he thought. On this particular day, the defendant was Eva Carter, a young woman accused of embezzlement from her employer, a high-profile financial firm. Eva had worked her way up from a modest background, earning every bit of her success through sheer determination and intelligence. But that didn't seem to matter in Judge Warner's courtroom. The evidence against her was circumstantial at best, and her lawyer, Amelia Torres, had fought tooth and nail to prove her innocence. But Judge Warner's demeanor throughout the trial left no doubt about where his sympathies lay. He interrupted Amelia repeatedly, dismissed her arguments, and allowed the prosecution to present dubious evidence without challenge. As the jury returned with their verdict, Eva stood, her hands trembling slightly but her chin held high. She had done nothing wrong, and she trusted that the truth would prevail. "We find the defendant guilty," the foreman announced. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Amelia looked stunned, and Eva's knees nearly buckled. Judge Warner smirked slightly, barely concealing his satisfaction. He banged his gavel and ordered Eva to step forward for sentencing. "Young lady," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "you've shown a blatant disregard for the law and for the trust placed in you by your employer. Embezzlement is a serious crime, and I intend to make an example of you." Amelia tried to object, to argue for a lighter sentence, but Judge Warner silenced her with a glare. "You're out of line, counselor," he snapped. "This court has no patience for theatrics." He turned back to Eva. "I hereby sentence you to 7 years in state prison. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down, and Eva's world shattered. The days that followed were a blur for Eva. She was processed, stripped of her belongings, and thrust into the cold, harsh environment of the state prison. But while her circumstances had changed, her resolve had not. Eva knew she was innocent, and she was determined to prove it. She spent her nights replaying every detail of the trial in her mind, looking for the cracks in the prosecution's case and the judge's overt bias. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Amelia wasn't giving up. She knew something was deeply wrong with the verdict and with Judge Warner's conduct. She began digging into his past, poring over transcripts of his previous rulings and looking for patterns. What she found shocked her. Judge Warner had a history of disproportionately harsh sentences for women, particularly those who dared to challenge traditional gender roles. Female lawyers, defendants, and even witnesses often found themselves on the receiving end of his ire. Amelia compiled a dossier of evidence, but she knew it wasn't enough to appeal Eva's conviction. She needed something more, a smoking gun. Inside the prison, Eva wasn't just waiting for rescue. She was planning. She spent hours in the library, studying legal books and cases. She struck up conversations with other inmates, learning their stories and finding common threads in their experiences. Many of them had been victims of biased rulings, and some had even appeared before Judge Warner. Eva began to piece together a larger picture, one that confirmed what Amelia had suspected. Judge Warner wasn't just biased, he was corrupt. Several inmates mentioned how he had ties to influential businessmen and political figures, many of whom had benefited from his rulings. Eva realized that her conviction wasn't just a miscarriage of justice. It was part of a larger web of power and corruption. But knowing the truth and proving it were two different things. Eva needed allies, both inside and outside the prison. She started by reaching out to Amelia, smuggling out letters through trusted contacts. In her letters, she detailed what she had learned and urged Amelia to keep digging. Amelia responded with updates on her investigation. She had uncovered financial records suggesting that Judge Warner had received large, unexplained payments over the years. The transactions were routed through shell companies, making them difficult to trace, but Amelia was relentless. She enlisted the help of a forensic accountant, who began unraveling the web of corruption. Eva's time in prison wasn't without its challenges. She faced hostility from some inmates and indifference from the guards. But her intelligence and determination earned her the respect of a small group of women who became her allies. Together, they began documenting their experiences and gathering evidence of systemic abuse within the prison system, evidence they hoped would one day help their cause. Months turned into a year, but Eva and Amelia's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Whispers about Judge Warner's corruption began to spread, and journalists started sniffing around. One reporter, a seasoned investigative journalist named Lisa Monroe, reached out to Amelia after hearing rumors about Eva's case. "I think we can help each other," Lisa said during their first meeting. "I've been following Judge Warner's career for years, and I've always suspected something wasn't right. If you're willing to share what you've found, I'll make sure the story gets the attention it deserves." Amelia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Eva's freedom depends on this. Let's do it." The exposé that followed sent shockwaves through the legal community. Lisa's article, titled "The Judge Who Played God," detailed years of corruption, bias, and misconduct. It included testimonies from former defendants, evidence of financial impropriety, and accounts of Judge Warner's courtroom behavior. The article sparked public outrage, and pressure mounted on the justice system to investigate. A formal inquiry was launched, and Judge Warner was placed under review. But for Eva, the fight was far from over. The wheels of justice turned slowly, and she knew that clearing her name would require more than public outrage. It would require undeniable proof. Inside the prison, Eva continued to gather evidence, working with her allies to document the stories of other women who had suffered under Judge Warner's rulings. She also kept studying, determined to one day use her knowledge to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been wronged. The exposé on Judge Warner created a firestorm of controversy. News outlets picked up the story, diving deeper into his rulings, finances, and the undeniable patterns of gender bias in his courtroom. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, with demonstrators holding signs demanding justice for Eva and others who had been wrongfully convicted under Warner's gavel. Inside the prison, Eva's days felt slightly brighter. Though still behind bars, she saw hope in the news coverage and the public's growing outrage. Letters from Amelia and Lisa Monroe kept her updated on the inquiry. But Eva knew the fight wasn't over. Public pressure could only go so far. The legal system would require solid evidence to overturn her conviction. And that evidence came sooner than anyone expected. One day, Amelia called Lisa in a frenzy. "I've got something," she said, her voice brimming with urgency. One of my contacts managed to get their hands on leaked emails between Warner and a senior partner at Eva's former firm. Lisa listened intently as Amelia explained. The emails contained incriminating details about a deal struck between Judge Warner and the firm. In exchange for ruling harshly against Eva and covering up their internal fraud, Warner had received a substantial bribe funneled through a shell company. "This is it," Amelia said. "This is the smoking gun we've been waiting for." Lisa wasted no time. Within days, she published a follow-up article exposing the emails and the sordid deal between Warner and the firm. The backlash was swift and brutal. Warner's defense crumbled as more whistleblowers came forward, emboldened by the growing scrutiny. His financial records, previously dismissed as circumstantial, were now damning evidence of his corruption. With Warner under investigation, Amelia filed a motion to overturn Eva's conviction, citing the overwhelming evidence of judicial misconduct. The case gained traction, and Eva was granted a hearing to present her case before an appellate court. The hearing was scheduled for a crisp spring morning. Eva, escorted from prison in shackles, walked into the courtroom with her head held high. She wore the same quiet confidence that had carried her through the darkest days. Amelia stood by her side, her briefcase packed with evidence and determination. The courtroom was packed with journalists, supporters, and curious onlookers. Warner's downfall had captured national attention, and Eva's case had become a symbol of systemic reform. As the judges entered and took their seats, the room fell silent. Amelia began her argument, presenting the evidence of Warner's corruption, the biased rulings, and the emails that proved Eva's innocence. She spoke with a conviction that left no room for doubt, her voice steady and unwavering. "This case is not just about Eva Carter," she said in her closing statement. It's about a system that allowed corruption and bias to flourish. Overturning this conviction is the first step toward restoring faith in our justice system. The judges deliberated for hours, but when they returned, their decision was unanimous. Eva's conviction was overturned. The moment the gavel came down, the courtroom erupted in applause. Eva's shackles were removed, and for the first time in over a year, she walked free. Amelia embraced her tightly, tears streaming down both their faces. "You did it," Amelia whispered. "You're free." Eva smiled through her tears. "We did it. Thank you for never giving up on me." As they stepped outside, they were met with a crowd of supporters cheering and holding signs that read "Justice for Eva" and "Accountability for All." The air buzzed with celebration, but for Eva, this was just the beginning. She wasn't content to simply move on with her life. She had seen the cracks in the system, and she was determined to fix them. In the weeks that followed, Eva became a vocal advocate for judicial reform. She spoke at rallies, appeared on talk shows, and worked closely with nonprofit organizations to push for systemic change. Her story inspired countless others, many of whom came forward with their own accounts of injustice. Amelia and Lisa joined her in these efforts, forming a coalition dedicated to exposing corruption and supporting wrongfully convicted individuals. They launched a campaign to implement stricter oversight of judicial conduct, ensuring that no one else would suffer under the gavel of a corrupt judge. As for Judge Warner, his fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. He was disbarred, stripped of his judicial title, and faced multiple charges of corruption, bribery, and abuse of power. At his trial, former defendants testified about the injustices they had suffered in his courtroom, painting a damning picture of a man who had used his position for personal gain. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, Eva was in the courtroom, watching as Warner was led away in handcuffs. Their eyes met briefly, and for the first time, Eva saw fear in his. She felt no sympathy. Justice had been served. Months later, Eva stood on the steps of the state capitol, addressing a crowd of thousands. The coalition's efforts had led to the introduction of new legislation aimed at preventing judicial corruption and protecting the rights of defendants. Eva's speech was the centerpiece of the event. "I was just one of many who suffered under a broken system," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "But together, we've shown that change is possible. Today, we take a stand, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come. Justice isn't just a word, it's a promise. And it's up to us to keep that promise alive." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the city. In the years that followed, Eva's work continued to make an impact. The coalition grew into a national movement, with chapters in every state. Judicial reforms were passed, and oversight committees were established to hold judges accountable. Eva herself went on to law school, determined to use her experience to help others. Her first case as an attorney was representing a young woman who had been wrongfully convicted, an experience that brought her journey full circle. As she stood in the courtroom, presenting her argument with the same fire and determination that Amelia had once shown for her, Eva felt a deep sense of purpose. She had turned her pain into power, her injustice into action. And she knew, without a doubt, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Eva's first case as an attorney was a triumph, not just for her client, but for herself. As she walked out of the courtroom, the young woman she had represented, a single mother named Vanessa, embraced her tightly. "I don't know how to thank you," Vanessa said, tears in her eyes. "You've given me my life back." Eva smiled warmly. "You don't have to thank me. Just go live the life you deserve. That's thanks enough." The victory only solidified Eva's resolve. She knew firsthand how it felt to have your freedom taken away unjustly, and she vowed to dedicate her career to ensuring that no one else would endure what she had. But Eva's mission wasn't just about individual cases. It was about transforming the system that had allowed those injustices to happen in the first place. The coalition Eva co-founded with Amelia and Lisa, now known as the Justice Reimagined Project, continued to grow. What began as a grassroots effort blossomed into a national organization with chapters in every state. Their initiatives ranged from advocating for judicial reforms to providing legal aid for wrongfully convicted individuals. They even established a mentorship program to support young lawyers committed to ethical advocacy. One of their most ambitious projects was the creation of a database that tracked patterns of judicial bias and misconduct. The database, built with the help of tech volunteers and data analysts, became a powerful tool for holding judges accountable. It wasn't long before it caught the attention of lawmakers, leading to the creation of independent oversight committees tasked with reviewing judicial conduct. Eva became a sought-after speaker, traveling the country to share her story and inspire others to join the fight for justice. But she remained grounded, never losing sight of the people whose lives were at the heart of her mission. One day, while working late in her office, Eva received a call from Lisa. "You're going to want to see this," Lisa said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Turn on the news." Eva grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. The headline scrolling across the screen read, "Landmark legislation to reform judicial accountability passes in Congress." She watched as lawmakers spoke about the importance of transparency and fairness in the legal system, many of them citing the Justice Reimagined project as a driving force behind the bill. Eva felt a swell of pride and gratitude. This was the change she had dreamed of, and it was finally happening. Amelia walked into the office just as Eva turned off the TV. "I saw the news," Amelia said, her face lighting up. "We did it, Eva." Eva shook her head. "We didn't do it alone. This is everyone's victory." Amelia nodded. "Still, you should be proud. You've turned your pain into something incredible." Eva smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you, Amelia. You believed in me when no one else did." Amelia placed a hand on her shoulder. "And I always will." But not everyone was thrilled with Eva's success. As the Justice Reimagined project gained traction, it also attracted powerful opponents: judges, politicians, and corporations who felt threatened by the movement's push for accountability. Eva received hate mail, online threats, and even anonymous letters warning her to back down. One night, as Eva was leaving her office, she noticed a car parked across the street with its engine running. The same car had been there the night before. She felt a chill run down her spine but forced herself to stay calm. She pulled out her phone and texted Amelia, letting her know what was happening. The next morning, Amelia insisted on hiring security for Eva, a decision Eva reluctantly agreed to. "You can't fight for justice if you're not around to do it," Amelia said firmly. "We need you, Eva." Despite the challenges, Eva refused to back down. She knew the road she had chosen was fraught with obstacles, but she also knew it was worth it. For every person who tried to silence her, there were countless others who stood beside her, ready to fight for the same cause. One of those people was Marcus, the young man Eva had mentored during her time in prison. Now a college graduate and a budding engineer, Marcus had never forgotten the lessons Eva had taught him. He joined the Justice Reimagined project as a volunteer, using his skills to help build and maintain the organization's database. "It's the least I can do," Marcus said one afternoon as he and Eva worked side by side. "You believed in me when no one else did. I want to make sure other people get that same chance." Eva smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You're an inspiration, Marcus. Don't ever forget that." The years passed, and Eva's impact continued to grow. She became a respected figure in the legal community, known not just for her brilliance as an attorney but for her unwavering commitment to justice. Her story was taught in law schools as an example of resilience and courage, and her name became synonymous with reform. But for Eva, the most meaningful moments were the quiet ones, the letters from people she had helped, the victories in court that gave families their lives back, the conversations with young people who saw her as a role model. One evening, as she sat on her porch reflecting on her journey, Amelia joined her. "You've done something incredible, Eva," Amelia said, handing her a cup of tea. "You've changed lives." Eva nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "But there's still so much to do." Amelia laughed softly. "There always will be. But you've shown us what's possible. And that's more than most people can say." Eva looked out at the horizon, the setting sun casting the world in shades of gold and pink. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about all of us. Together, we can create a system that truly lives up to its promise." And with that, she raised her cup in a silent toast, to justice, to resilience, and to the power of hope. As Eva's influence grew, so did the reach of the Justice Reimagined project. It was no longer just about judicial reform, it became a beacon for addressing systemic inequalities in the justice system as a whole. Wrongful convictions, inadequate public defense, and disproportionate sentencing were all areas the organization tackled head-on. One day, while reviewing the latest batch of letters sent to the organization, Eva came across one that caught her attention. It was from a woman named Clara, who claimed to have evidence of corruption in her small-town court system. Clara's brother had been convicted of a crime he didn't commit, and she believed the judge in his case was colluding with local law enforcement to secure wrongful convictions for profit. Eva's instincts flared. This wasn't the first time she had heard of such schemes, but Clara's letter included details that suggested something much larger at play. Eva immediately contacted Amelia and Lisa to discuss the case. "This could be huge," Amelia said during their meeting. "If Clara's claims are true, it's not just about her brother. This could expose a network of corruption." Lisa nodded. "I'll start digging into the judge's background and financial records. If there's something there, I'll find it." Eva reached out to Clara, arranging a meeting to hear her story firsthand. When Clara arrived at the office, she was visibly nervous but determined. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," she admitted, clutching a folder of documents. "But I can't just sit by and let this happen." Eva gave her an encouraging smile. "You're doing the right thing, Clara, and we'll do everything we can to help." Clara handed over the folder, which contained court transcripts, financial records, and sworn statements from witnesses. As Eva and Amelia reviewed the documents, a chilling pattern began to emerge. The judge presiding over Clara's brother's case had a history of suspicious rulings, all of which seemed to benefit certain local businesses and officials. "This is it," Amelia said, her voice resolute. "This is the kind of case that could expose an entire network of corruption." Eva, Amelia, and Lisa worked tirelessly to build a case. They traveled to Clara's town, interviewing witnesses, collecting evidence, and uncovering a web of connections that pointed to a larger conspiracy. What they found was staggering: a pay-to-play scheme involving local judges, police officers, and even private prison contractors. The corruption ran deep, and exposing it would require more than just evidence. It would require courage. Clara's brother, along with several other wrongfully convicted individuals, agreed to testify. Their stories painted a damning picture of a system that prioritized profit over justice. The team compiled their findings into a comprehensive report, which they submitted to the state attorney general. The response was immediate. A task force was formed to investigate the claims, and warrants were issued for several key players in the scheme. The trial that followed was one of the most high-profile cases in the state's history. Eva represented Clara's brother, fighting to have his conviction overturned. Her arguments were sharp, passionate, and backed by an overwhelming mountain of evidence. "This case isn't just about one man's freedom," Eva said during her closing argument. "It's about exposing a system that has preyed on the vulnerable for far too long. Justice demands accountability, and accountability starts here." The jury deliberated for less than a day before delivering their verdict: not guilty. Clara's brother was exonerated, and the other wrongfully convicted individuals were released soon after. The fallout from the trial was seismic. Several officials, including the judge and the police chief, were arrested and charged. The private prison company involved in the scheme faced massive fines and public backlash, forcing them to shut down several facilities. For Eva, the victory was bittersweet. While she was overjoyed for Clara and her brother, she couldn't ignore the systemic failures that had allowed such corruption to thrive in the first place. She knew the fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. In the months that followed, the Justice Reimagined project launched a new initiative focused on private prison reform. They worked to pass legislation that banned the use of private prisons in several states and advocated for investment in rehabilitation and community programs instead. Eva also began mentoring a new generation of lawyers and activists, sharing her knowledge and experiences to empower them in the fight for justice. Among her mentor was Clara, who had decided to pursue a career in law after seeing the impact Eva had made. "I want to be like you," Clara said during one of their meetings. "I want to fight for people who don't have a voice." Eva smiled, her heart swelling with pride. You already are, Claire. And I have no doubt you'll make an incredible difference. As the Justice Reimagined project continued to grow, Eva found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She thought about the woman she had been when she first entered Judge Warner's courtroom, scared, confused, and desperate for justice. And she thought about the woman she had become, strong, determined, and unyielding in her pursuit of truth. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing the latest proposals for reform, Amelia walked in with a framed photo. It was from the day Eva had been exonerated, showing her standing on the courthouse steps, surrounded by supporters. "I thought you might want this," Amelia said, placing the photo on Eva's desk. Eva stared at the image, her throat tightening. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's a good reminder of why we do this." Amelia nodded. "And it's a reminder of how far we can go when we refuse to give up." Years later, Eva's name would be etched in history books as a symbol of justice and resilience. Her work had led to widespread reforms, freeing countless individuals and holding corrupt officials accountable. But for Eva, the greatest reward was the knowledge that she had turned her pain into purpose. On the 10th anniversary of her exoneration, Eva stood on a stage at a gala honoring the Justice Reimagined project. As she looked out at the audience, filled with friends, colleagues, and the people she had helped, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. "When I was wrongfully convicted," she began, her voice steady, "I thought my life was over. But what I learned is that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to create light. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about building a better world for everyone." The crowd rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the hall. And as Eva stepped down from the stage, she knew her work wasn't finished. There was still so much to do. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. Together, they would continue to fight for justice, for truth, and for the hope of a better tomorrow. The gala celebrating the 10th anniversary of Eva's exoneration was a turning point, not just for her, but for the movement she had built. The momentum from the Justice Reimagined project was undeniable, and it became a force for systemic change across the nation. Still, Eva knew the fight wasn't just about winning cases or passing legislation. It was about shifting mindsets, rebuilding trust, and ensuring justice truly served all people. After the gala, Eva spent several weeks reflecting on the next steps for the organization. Though their successes were many, there were still gaps in the system, areas where marginalized voices were silenced and justice was out of reach. One glaring issue that caught Eva's attention was the lack of accessibility in legal representation. "Too many people are left to fend for themselves in court because they can't afford a lawyer," Eva said during a meeting with her team. "Public defenders are overworked and underfunded, and the people they're meant to serve often fall through the cracks. That has to change." Amelia nodded in agreement. "What are you thinking?" "We need to expand our mission," Eva said. "Let's create a program that provides free legal representation for low-income individuals. But not just representation, we'll also offer education, so people understand their rights and can better navigate the system." Lisa leaned forward, her eyes lighting up. "I love it. We can call it the Equal Defense Initiative. And we'll make sure it's staffed with top-notch lawyers who are passionate about justice." The team got to work immediately, securing funding, recruiting attorneys, and building partnerships with community organizations. Within months, the Equal Defense Initiative was launched, and the response was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out for help, many of them sharing heartbreaking stories of how the system had failed them. One of the first cases taken on by the Equal Defense Initiative was that of a single father named Darnell. He had been wrongfully accused of theft after a mix-up at his workplace, and the charges threatened to tear his family apart. Darnell couldn't afford a private lawyer, and his public defender had been juggling dozens of other cases, leaving little time to build a proper defense. When Eva met Darnell, she immediately recognized the fear and frustration in his eyes. It reminded her of how she had felt standing before Judge Warner, powerless against a system stacked against her. "We're going to fight this," Eva assured him. "And we're going to win." The case was complicated, but Eva and her team worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and exposed the sloppy investigation that had led to Darnell's arrest. When the trial finally came, Eva's arguments were clear and compelling. "This isn't just about Darnell," she said during her closing statement. "It's about a system that too often assumes guilt instead of seeking the truth. We owe it to him, and to everyone, to do better." The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, the verdict was unanimous: not guilty. Tears streamed down Darnell's face as he hugged Eva, his gratitude overwhelming. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You saved my family." Eva smiled, her own eyes glistening with emotion. "Just live your life, Darnell. That's thanks enough." The success of the Equal Defense Initiative brought renewed attention to the Justice Reimagined project, and Eva found herself busier than ever. She traveled to Washington, D.C., to testify before Congress, advocating for increased funding for public defenders and reforms to the bail system. Her testimony was a turning point, leading to the passage of a landmark bill aimed at reducing inequalities in the justice system. But with success came new challenges. As the Justice Reimagined project grew, so did the pushback from those who saw its work as a threat to their power. Eva received more threats, some of them chillingly specific. Security around her was tightened, but she refused to let fear deter her. "We can't stop now," she told her team during a strategy meeting. "If they're fighting this hard to silence us, it means we're making an impact." Amelia placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're with you, Eva, every step of the way." Despite the challenges, Eva's resolve never wavered. Over the next few years, her organization expanded its reach, opening chapters in rural areas and underserved communities. They trained hundreds of young lawyers, many of whom had been inspired by Eva's story, to carry the fight forward. Among those young lawyers was Clara, the woman whose brother Eva had helped exonerate. Now a rising star in the legal world, Clara had taken on some of the toughest cases, earning a reputation as a fierce advocate for justice. One afternoon, Clara stopped by Eva's office, holding a framed photo. "I thought you'd like this," she said, handing it to Eva. The photo showed Clara standing in a courtroom, her arm around her client, a young man who had just been found not guilty after a years-long battle to prove his innocence. The look of joy on their faces was unmistakable. Eva smiled as she looked at the photo. "You're doing incredible work, Clara. I couldn't be prouder." Clara shook her head. "I learned from the best." As Eva's 50th birthday approached, her team decided to throw a surprise celebration. The event was held at the community center where Eva's journey had first gained momentum, and the room was filled with friends, colleagues, and the countless people whose lives she had touched. When Eva arrived, she was overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and gratitude. Speeches were given, stories were shared, and by the end of the night, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "You've built something extraordinary, Eva," Amelia said during her toast. "Not just an organization, but a legacy. You've shown us that even in the face of injustice, hope can prevail. And for that we thank you." Eva stood to respond, her heart full. "I didn't do this alone," she said. "Everything we've accomplished has been because of the people in this room. Together, we've shown that change is possible. And together, we'll keep fighting, because justice is worth it." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the room. In the years that followed, Eva continued her work with the Justice Reimagined project, always finding new ways to push for progress. She wrote a memoir, sharing her journey from wrongful conviction to becoming a leader in the fight for justice. The book became a bestseller, inspiring countless readers to take action in their own communities. But for Eva, the greatest reward was seeing the ripple effects of her work. The people she had helped went on to help others, creating a chain of change that stretched far beyond what she could have imagined. On the 20th anniversary of her exoneration, Eva stood once again on the steps of the courthouse where her life had changed forever. This time, she wasn't there to fight a battle, she was there to celebrate a victory. As she looked out at the crowd gathered before her, she felt a deep sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, there was always more work to be done. But she knew, without a doubt, that they were making a difference. And for Eva, that was enough. 20 years after her exoneration, Eva had become more than a leader. She was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the belief that justice could prevail, even against the most insurmountable odds. Her face was recognizable across the country, but it was her actions that had left an indelible mark on society. Still, Eva never sought the spotlight. Her focus remained on the work, the people, and the movement she had built. As Eva's organization grew into an international force, the Justice Reimagined project expanded its mission to address global inequities in justice systems. In developing countries, where corruption and bias were often rampant, Eva's team partnered with local advocates to create training programs for lawyers, build accountability mechanisms for judges, and provide resources to underserved communities. During one of these international missions, Eva traveled to a small town in South America where a community leader had been wrongfully imprisoned for protesting illegal land seizures by a multinational corporation. The case reminded Eva of her own fight, and she immediately dove into action, working alongside local attorneys to build a defense. The trial was grueling, with the corporation's lawyers using every tactic to delay and intimidate. But Eva and her team persisted, exposing the corporation's illegal activities and rallying global support for the community leader. When the verdict was announced, acquittal, the town erupted into celebration, and Eva found herself embraced by people whose gratitude was immeasurable. "You've given us our voice back," the community leader said through tears. "We'll never forget what you've done." Eva shook her head humbly. "It wasn't just me. This was your fight, and you won it." Back in the United States, Eva was approached by a filmmaker who wanted to create a documentary about her life and the work of the Justice Reimagined project. At first, Eva was hesitant. She wasn't comfortable with the idea of her story being in the spotlight again. But after discussing it with Amelia and Lisa, she realized the potential impact the documentary could have. "If it inspires even one person to stand up for what's right," Amelia said, "then it's worth it." The documentary, titled Justice Reimagined, The Eva Carter Story, premiered to critical acclaim. It chronicled Eva's journey from her wrongful conviction to her rise as a global advocate for justice. The film included interviews with people she had helped, behind-the-scenes footage of her work, and reflections from Eva herself. The documentary didn't just bring attention to Eva's story, it reignited conversations about systemic reform and inspired a new wave of activists, lawyers, and community leaders to join the fight for justice. As Eva approached her 60th birthday, she began to think about her legacy. The Justice Reimagined project was thriving, with a team of passionate leaders ready to carry its mission forward. Eva knew it was time to step back from the day-to-day operations, but she also knew she wasn't done contributing to the cause. At a board meeting, Eva announced her decision to transition into an advisory role, allowing the next generation of leaders to take the reins. "This organization has always been about more than one person," she said. "It's about the collective power of people who refuse to accept injustice. And I have no doubt that you'll continue to carry that torch." The announcement was met with a mix of emotions: gratitude for Eva's leadership and determination to honor her legacy. Clara, now a senior member of the organization, gave a heartfelt speech. "Eva, you've taught us what it means to fight for justice with courage and integrity. We'll carry your lessons with us every step of the way." In her advisory role, Eva focused on mentoring young advocates and writing about her experiences. She published a second book, Fighting for the Voiceless, which became an instant bestseller and was translated into multiple languages. The book delved into the systemic issues she had encountered throughout her career and offered practical solutions for building a more equitable justice system. Eva also dedicated more time to teaching, accepting a position as a visiting professor at a prestigious law school. Her classes, which blended legal theory with real-world advocacy, became some of the most sought-after courses on campus. Students admired her authenticity, her willingness to share her struggles, and her unshakable belief in the power of justice. One of her students, a young woman named Priya, approached Eva after class one day. "Professor Carter," she said nervously, "I just wanted to thank you. Your story is the reason I decided to go to law school." Eva smiled warmly. "Thank you, Priya. That means a lot to me. What kind of law do you want to practice?" "I'm not sure yet," Priya admitted. "But I know I want to make a difference, like you have." "You will," Eva said confidently. "Just remember, the key to making a difference is staying true to your values, no matter how hard it gets." Though Eva's life had changed in many ways, her commitment to justice remained as strong as ever. She continued to attend rallies, support legislative efforts, and speak at events around the world. Her name became synonymous with resilience, integrity, and the belief that one person could spark a movement. One evening, as Eva sat on her porch reflecting on her journey, Amelia joined her. The two women, now lifelong friends, sipped tea as they watched the sun set over the horizon. "You've done so much, Eva," Amelia said. "Do you ever think about slowing down?" Eva chuckled softly. "Sometimes. But there's always more to do. And I want to leave the world better than I found it." Amelia nodded. "You already have." As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Eva felt a deep sense of peace. She had turned her pain into purpose, her struggles into strength, and her story into a force for change. And though there was still work to be done, she knew she wasn't alone. The fight for justice was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who believed in the power of hope, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of what was right. Eva's decision to step into an advisory role allowed her to reflect on the ripple effects of her work. What had started as a personal fight for justice had evolved into a global movement that spanned continents, empowered communities, and inspired countless others to stand up against injustice. But Eva knew that even the strongest movements needed to adapt and evolve to stay effective. As she settled into her new role, Eva received an invitation to attend an international summit on justice reform in Geneva. The summit brought together legal experts, activists, and policymakers from around the world to discuss innovative solutions to systemic inequities. Eva's keynote speech was the highlight of the event. Standing before an audience of thousands, Eva spoke with the same quiet authority that had become her trademark. "Justice is not a fixed concept," she began. "It is a living, breathing promise that we must nurture and protect. And when that promise is broken, it is our responsibility, not just as lawyers or judges, but as human beings, to mend it." Her speech was met with thunderous applause, and after the summit, she was approached by leaders from various countries seeking her advice on reforming their justice systems. Eva took these opportunities seriously, collaborating with international teams to share best practices and develop strategies tailored to each country's unique challenges. Back in the United States, Eva's men's were thriving. Clara had taken on a leadership role within the Justice Reimagined project, expanding its reach into rural communities where access to legal resources was often scarce. Marcus, now a senior engineer, had designed a groundbreaking app that connected individuals with pro bono legal services, streamlining access to justice for those in need. Eva's former student Priya, now a practicing attorney, had made headlines for successfully challenging discriminatory zoning laws that disproportionately affected low-income neighborhoods. Priya often credited Eva as her inspiration, telling reporters, "She taught me that the law is a tool for change, and it's up to us to wield it with integrity." These successes filled Eva with pride, but she remained humble. "The real heroes," she often said, "are the people who have the courage to fight for their rights, even when the odds are stacked against them." One of the most significant milestones in Eva's later years came when she was approached by a group of activists working to abolish for-profit prisons in the United States. They had made progress in several states but needed a figurehead to galvanize national support. Eva, with her deep understanding of the issue and her unparalleled credibility, was the perfect choice. After careful consideration, Eva agreed to lead the campaign. Her involvement brought immediate attention to the cause, and her speeches rallied people from all walks of life. "Justice should never be a commodity," she declared at one rally. "When we allow profit to dictate the terms of punishment, we lose sight of our humanity." The campaign faced fierce opposition from powerful corporations with deep pockets, but Eva was undeterred. She worked tirelessly to educate the public, meet with lawmakers, and build coalitions across political divides. Over time, the movement gained traction, and several key pieces of legislation were passed to phase out private prisons and invest in rehabilitation programs instead. As Eva's work continued, so did the challenges. The threats against her became more sophisticated, and the toll of decades of advocacy began to weigh on her physically. But Eva refused to let fear or fatigue stop her. She often said, "I've faced worse, and I've come out stronger. This work is worth every sacrifice." One of the most poignant moments of her later years came when she returned to the prison where she had once been incarcerated. The facility, now transformed into a rehabilitation center focused on education and vocational training, was unrecognizable from the cold, oppressive place Eva had endured. As she toured the center, she spoke with the men and women who were benefiting from its programs. One young woman, Maria, approached Eva with tears in her eyes. "I read your book," Maria said, her voice trembling. "It gave me hope when I thought there was none. Thank you for fighting for people like me." Eva embraced Maria, her heart full. "You're the reason we do this," she said. "Never forget your worth." On the eve of her 70th birthday, Eva was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award at a ceremony attended by leaders, activists, and friends from around the world. As she stood on stage, surrounded by the people who had been part of her journey, she reflected on the incredible arc of her life. "None of this would have been possible without the people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "To Amelia, Lisa, Clara, Marcus, and everyone who has walked this path with me, you are my heroes. And to the next generation I say this: the fight for justice is never over. But together, we can create a world where fairness, compassion, and dignity prevail." The standing ovation that followed was a testament to the lives Eva had touched and the legacy she had built. In the years that followed, Eva continued to mentor, write, and advocate. Though she slowed down physically, her mind remained sharp, and her influence only grew. She often spent quiet evenings on her porch, reflecting on her journey and the many lives intertwined with hers. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amelia joined her, as she so often did. They sat in comfortable silence, the bonds of their friendship stronger than ever. "You've built something extraordinary, Eva," Amelia said softly. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Eva smiled, her gaze fixed on the fading light. "What's next is for others to carry the torch. My work was never just about me, it was about us. And I know the fight will go on, stronger than ever." As the stars began to appear, Eva felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced injustice, endured hardship, and turned her pain into purpose. And though her journey was nearing its end, she knew her legacy would live on in the countless lives she had touched and the movement she had helped build. Because justice, she believed, was not just an ideal, it was a promise. And she had kept that promise every step of the way.